and welcome to this episode of People of Butler County, episode 2. My name is Maddie, and today I'm interviewing someone that many of you in the prevention field might already know. He's played a major role in problem gambling prevention efforts at both state and national levels. Now, he isn't from Butler County, but the work he does impacts the entire state of Ohio, so we'll let it slide. Welcome to our show, Derek Longmire. I hope you enjoyed this interview.
And good morning, Maddie.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, great.
Okay, perfect. I don't see any toys in the background.
My daughter's taking a nap, so I thought that would be a perfect time to do a little bit of quick pickup.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, my dog's asleep on the couch way over there, so hoping the doorbell doesn't ring because you know how that will go. So.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So how are you doing with all the craziness going on?
Doing the best we can. You put all your plans together that you spend months and months on, and then it's like, okay, those are all out the window. Let's try something new.
Right. Yeah. And I think I saw you said you're used to working from home.
Yeah, I've been home based for the last 4.5 years.
Oh, wow.
And then 2 weeks ago, we just moved into our new offices. So I guess this will be getting the third week. So we moved in on a Monday, and then I packed my stuff up and moved back on Friday.
Oh, wow.
So
didn't get to enjoy
it was short-lived.
Right. So you are the executive director of the Problem Gambling Network of Ohio, and you've been in this position since 2016. Is that correct?
Correct. So I worked at Prevention Action Alliance for about 10 years before that. And at that time, it was right as the casinos and racinos were beginning to open. And the state needed to have some prevention specific trainings around gambling, and looked throughout, and they didn't exist. So at Prevention Action Alliance, we were tasked with putting together a series of gambling specific trainings. And at that point, the majority of my job was focused on the Parents Who Host Lose the Most Don't Be a Party to Teenage Drinking campaign. So as you look at alcohol, as there's a age where you can participate and an age where you can't, gambling the same. I was tasked with taking on the gambling work. So I did that, didn't know a thing about gambling, but learned a lot. And then that led me to serve on PGNO's board, and then ultimately become the PGNO executive director.
Okay, awesome. And I think you answered a lot of my questions there. I wanted to know a little bit more about your background. So spent 10 years at Prevention Action Alliance, and so you kind of talked about what you did at Prevention Action Alliance and how you started having to get into the world of problem gambling prevention. So your current role, what does a typical day look like for you? What does it entail, and what all do you do?
Oh, wow. Well, it's all across the board. So typical day is kind of dependent on what people's needs are. So as PGNO, with our mission and focus, we want to make sure that we provide awareness, support, and resources to communities. And a lot of that work comes through promoting the statewide campaign Before You Bet, as well as changethegameohio.org. We also work with the properties to make sure that the responsible gambling efforts they have going on there are working appropriately, as well as things like their voluntary exclusion program and employees trainings, things along those lines. And then also work with our prevention and treatment professionals that many times don't have a strong background in gambling. For a lot of people, gambling was an added on piece that didn't really exist as a part of their job. So helping get the workforce trained up. So as we say, call the Ohio Problem Gambling Helpline. There's someone on the treatment side that can help support that, as well as a strong prevention infrastructure in place to really understand how gambling can fit into all the other prevention activities going on, not only through the community, but throughout the state.
That sounds like a bunch of different stuff every single day that you're dealing with.
Right.
Awesome.
As a staff of one that is now a staff of 2, there's a lot of additional duties as assigned.
A staff of 2, wow, that's reading up about all you do, you work on both the state and the national level. So recently, sports betting has become the talk of Ohio, whether or not this bill is going to pass or not. Can you talk about kind of what that bill would mean and some other bills that are in legislation right now in Ohio?
Sure. Well, we have 2 bills in the state legislature related to sports betting. The first is Senate Bill 111, 111, which was introduced in March of last year, and that was introduced. It didn't really go anywhere, and then there was a couple hearings in the fall, right before the fall break, and that kind of had petered out. The bill between the two that seemed to have the most movement was House Bill 194, and that bill introduced a month after Senate Bill 111, so that was in April of 2019. It had a lot of hearings, never made it out of the House Finance Committee. And the big sticking points between the two bills is one, who is going to provide the regulatory authority over sports betting in Ohio. And then the second piece is what venues will be allowed to offer sports betting in Ohio. So as we were moving into the winter break, there was a lot of discussions kind of behind the scenes to talk about that. And then COVID-19 hit. Sports betting is no longer a concern, so we'll probably address that some point down the road.
For now.
When that opportunity pops back up.
Right, right. And that's actually a kind of a question I wanted to ask too. With the whole coronavirus pandemic going on, we can see that there is a relationship between crises like this and suicide and other mental health problems and substance abuse. Do you think that there's any kind of relationship between what's going on now, the crisis, and the world of problem gambling? Do they have any kind of relationship?
Well, certainly. Well, and March is Problem Gambling Awareness Month, and we had many plans to promote that month, not only through the 4 casinos and 7 racinos, but through a variety of other channels. But this COVID issue has kind of pushed all that aside. So our whole shift has changed, or our focus has shifted because of that. And initially, when we look at Problem Gambling Awareness Month in March, it coincides with March Madness and all the other sports betting opportunities to really tie in there. With March Madness not happening, with all the casinos and racinos closed, it really becomes a question of, okay, if people are gambling, the predominant areas of gambling, at least for this month and through what they normally do through legalized channels, are closed. Is that going to say, okay, let's just put a pin on this and begin gambling when they're reopened? Or are they going to pursue other forms of gambling that aren't legalized and regulated in the state, such as online gambling? And that's a big question that we have. And at this point, we don't really have a whole lot of information on it. Checked with the Ohio Problem Gambling Helpline last week, and call volume is about 75% of what it was last year, which isn't that surprising because we've got gambling establishments closed and March Madness. And he didn't really see any anomalies yet in terms of those who were calling. It was related to internet gambling, but we'd expect that even if that were the case, the problems wouldn't present themselves until we're a little farther down the road. So it's certainly something that we're focusing on, but yet don't really have a good sense of data as to what that might mean.
So you're thinking that maybe, hopefully, whenever this starts to die down, so to say, you guys will have a little more data on what the trends were during this time, but right now?
Absolutely. So each month we get a report from the Ohio Problem Gambling Helpline that asks, or that reflects how many individuals called and a little bit of demographic information. So what form of gambling were they calling from? What's their gender, region of the state, etc. So from that can really have us get a good sense of what gambling looks like from a month basis. And so the reports should be coming out next week, but from what I've heard so far, that they don't stand out too much from what previous months have shown or what previous years have shown.
Okay, thank you. It'll be interesting to see that later on. Okay, so let's talk about your background for a little bit. You have a bachelor's in psychology, Ohio State, and you still live in Columbus, right?
I do.
And you have an MBA too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So did you know going into college that you were going to go into the field of prevention?
Yes, I did. So
you did, actually.
I did.
I wasn't expecting that. Okay.
When I was in middle school, my school guidance counselor said, "Hey, you should really be involved in this drug-free group." So at that point I was, and that led me to my path of prevention today. So I did our high school work then, and then we had a youth-led group for our county, and then that's how I got connected with the Ohio Teen Institute. So yes, it was my ultimate goal that when I graduated from Ohio State that I would work in prevention. So I
Wow.
graduated and then worked in Northwest Ohio. I'm from the Lima area. So I worked in Hancock County for a little over 2 years. Really missed Columbus. So there's an opportunity at Ohio Parents for Drug Free Youth at that time, which is now Prevention Action Alliance. So that's how my statewide career in prevention began.
I didn't expect that. There's not, I mean, it's such a small, specific field that you don't have a lot of people that are like going into college knowing that prevention is what they want to do. So
Yes. So
interesting.
there's a few
Okay.
of us.
Very few, very few. Um, so when we talked about when the interest came into play, but with your background in psychology, you can probably answer this question a little better than some people. How does a problem gambling disorder is that the right terminology I should
Mhm.
use? Okay.
Or I guess it could be. Ask the question and then I'll expand.
Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. How does that compare to any other kind of substance use disorder? What are some of the similarities and differences? Because it kind of appears that problem gambling is like the mental illness nobody really talks about.
It certainly is. And when we look at kind of when the gambling field began, there was like the mental health people were like, we don't want it. And the substance use people were like, we don't want it. So it's like, okay, where do we fit? So we were just kind of these uh, little misfits that didn't really fit anywhere and kind of had to build our own structure, which I think has worked out really well. And back before the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services became Mental Health and Addiction Services when they were two separate entities, problem gambling services were actually tasked with Department of Alcohol and Drug Abuse Services. So it's always been within that substance use realm. And as we look at the changes in the DSM-5, it puts it in the same category as substance use disorder. That's really where the fit is. And as we look at the brain chemistry changes that happen when folks move from just participating in gambling to developing a gambling problem and then meeting the diagnostic criteria for a gambling disorder, then it really shows kind of the physical changes that have been made to the brain. And many of those changes are very similar to what we might see for someone that is dependent on cocaine. So while you're not intaking of a substance, the brain doesn't know the difference. So it's still operating as if you are.
Same pleasure chemicals and highlights in the brain occurring.
Yeah, those dopamine receptors fire, and it's just like you're taking in a substance even though you're not.
Interesting. So you answered my question. So touch on the right wording for, and I
Sure.
looked at one of your courses and you made sure to talk about that, but I want everyone to know what's the correct terminology they should be using.
So when we're talking kind of just generally about individuals that might have a gambling problem, it makes about 10% of Ohio adults, so pretty big group, and we just kind of refer to them as problem gamblers, individuals with gambling problems, somewhere along that realm. When you get further down into I meet the diagnostic criteria for a gambling disorder, then disordered gamblers or individuals with a gambling disorder would be the appropriate terminology. Compulsive gambling has been used in previous versions of the DSM, so that is a term that we might still see from past versions. And then other things that are just completely inappropriate, such as like the degenerate gambler, that still shows up in media things that I read. And so just being very clear and familiar with what the most appropriate terminology is, and in situations where inappropriate terminology is being used, just if it's in a report, I reach out to the reporter and say, hey, this is kind of our stigma reduction focus, and the terminology used is not really appropriate for today's language, and then share some resources available to what we should be using.
Here's what you can do or say instead, right? Okay. And then hopefully that will kind of change gradually down the line as more and more people start to understand the correct
I
wording?
see it less now, so we're getting
Okay.
better. But it's similar to what we might see, whether it's through gambling or substance use, the term addict, and just always reminding folks that no, these people have a medical condition like someone with diabetes or cancer. So they need to be uh, spoken of and presented as someone with a disease like any other.
Reduce the stigma. Perfect.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right. Looking back on your career in the prevention field, because it sounds like you've done all things prevention, not just
Yes.
problem gambling. That was kind of tossed on you. Um, well, what are some of the trends that you've noticed in Ohio that have changed over the course of, well, I guess since middle school, right?
It's been a
That's
couple decades.
okay. Yeah, yeah. What are some of the more prominent trends that you've noticed changes in throughout the state?
Well, when I look back to the things that we did in middle school and high school, and even things that I did as a young prevention professional, our focus on science today and our understanding of science is so much more profound. And we had our little uh, drug kit where we'd show our fellow students about this is what drugs look like, and we know that's not effective. So with that, the changes that we've been able to make along the way, as well as how broad prevention really has expanded. So when I look at prevention within when I was growing up, and even a lot of the work that we did in my first job, it was very school-based focused. And we know that through policy, through other environmental prevention strategies, that prevention really has a strong fit throughout the community, not just within the schools. And hopefully, through looking at COVID-19, will allow prevention specialists to really expand and let others know what resources they can actually offer to their community that's just beyond providing information in schools. And while it's important to have that school based education, if it's not supported by the community, then it's not going to be as effective as it could be. So
Right.
really look at that balance of prevention throughout a community in multiple ways as opposed to just one form.
Okay. And so, seeing that the scope of prevention has kind of branched out a little bit, with regards to problem gambling, has there been kind of a change in age group? Has there been a change in, you know, gambling activities that are more popular than others? How has that kind of changed over the course of the last few years?
Well, just looking at the availability of gambling in Ohio has certainly shifted a lot. And while the casinos and racinos are all 21 and over, it still shows that, hey, gambling is an acceptable thing to participate here in Ohio. So just a better kind of a um, gambling doesn't have that nuanced stigma that it may have had even 10 years ago. So being more mindful that overall there's more acceptance for gambling in the state, and with technology, there's also a whole lot more options for availability to gamble. And it's not just through again the casinos and racinos, but as we look at the huge expansion in online forms of gambling, whether that be through illegal offshore sites that are regulated or taxed, or some things that are, I will say, in the gray area, like what we might see with either like Fortnite and the loot box you can buy or the microtransactions there, currently completely unregulated, but still meet the same criteria for gambling.
Okay, and with youth having being the ones that are typically involved in those online games, I remember at the conference I went to. Was that last month? Um,
It seems like it
it
amazing,
seems
but
like
yes, it was just over a month ago.
okay. One of the breakout sessions, I forget who the presenter was, but his sons were there, and they kind of showed all the all the stuff about loot boxes, and we're all these prevention specialists sitting in there, and we're like, nothing about all
Mhm.
these loot boxes, and it's just crazy to see how all these little purchases can add up and how much
Mhm.
um, money can go into it with just spending a little bit at a time. Um, so what I that's risky for youth, but what are some other risk factors for youth or adults? What are protective factors for youth
Mhm.
and adults?
So when we look at protective factors for youth and adults related to gambling, exactly the same as protective factors for substance use and mental health issues. So those are completely aligned. For risk factors, again, very, very similar to what we might see from the substance use risk factors. Others that might pop up would be competitive family and someone that has ADHD is kind of a risk factor. And why? I'm not really sure. It could have a little bit to do with the brain chemistry, how just the way gambling can be played that can kind of meet some of those needs and draw you right in. And we also know that a big first win is a pretty substantial risk factor. So if I'm playing that Fortnite game and I buy that loot box for 99 cents and I win something worth $500, that's a huge win. And that really gives me that little buzz in my brain to say, hey, I want to chase that feeling again.
Mhm.
And through additional things. And we know that that first high, you can never replicate what that first high might look like again. And many times we see that that's what young people are doing, or they just don't understand the math behind the game. It sounds like, oh, it's sure, it's easy. Just have to spend 99 more cents and you're going to hit it. And when people just think, well, it's only $1. Well, sure, $1 now, but when you get your credit card bill at the end of the month and it's substantially more than that, then those little dollars add up.
Right. Okay, and then protective factors and the voluntary exclusion program. Could you
Yeah,
talk a little bit about that?
sure. So protective factors, again, very similar to what we might see with substance use. And for parents, particularly related to those that have gaming children, changethegameohio.org has a great website that has information for the individual students who are the players, the parents, as well as educators. And there's a toolkit that you can go to, get a little bit more information about the game, and have those conversations with your young people. Understand why they're playing the games that they are and what they get out of it. Also, make sure to check your credit card bill every month because many times when you're setting up those games, they're free to play, but it still requires a credit card to be linked to it. So that allows for those microtransactions down that road. So have those conversations and make sure that you're really connected with what your young people are doing, and sit down, watch them, see how they engage with the game. While we're also thinking about it from a gambling side, we also want to look at it from a domestic violence side as well. And if they're playing violent games, what might that do later down the road? So that's kind of related to the protective side. From a voluntary exclusion standpoint, Ohio has a statewide voluntary exclusion program, and that is for all casinos and our 7 racetinos. So casinos would be properties that have uh, table games as well as slot machines. And then our racinos have a racetrack and then what they call video lottery terminals. And video lottery terminals, to most people, is a slot machine. The only nuance is a little bit of the nuance is who regulates it. So the Ohio Lottery Commission regulates video lottery terminals, whereas the casinos are regulated by the Ohio Casino Control Commission. So
Okay.
there's a statewide program that's set up that anyone who's having a gambling problem can go into any of the 11 establishments and say, I would like to voluntarily exclude myself from this and all other properties within Ohio. And if they don't feel comfortable going back to a property, because we know that can be a trigger, then they can either call the Ohio Casino Control Commission, the Ohio Lottery Commission, or the property themselves and set up to meet with someone at like McDonald's to work through what that voluntary exclusion like. And for voluntary exclusion, they can choose to exclude for 1 year, 5 year, or a lifetime. And what that says is, I am voluntarily attesting that I will no longer go back to this property or the 10 others that are within Ohio for the selected amount of years that I choose. And if I do so, any currency that I have, so whether it be tickets or chips, will be forfeited, and I can also be charged with criminal trespass. So, for those that are new to recovery or trying to figure out how this works, it's not our recommended step that they go straight to the voluntary exclusion program. We really want to make sure that they can connect with a counselor, get a better sense of what their needs are, Because if you're already struggling with a gambling problem, you say, okay, I just need to voluntarily exclude, then you get caught on property. Not only do you have your gambling problems, you're going to have probably additional financial issues with your criminal trespass charge, as well as those other legal charges that might impact your job or your ability to get a job in the future. So something we should very want to make sure that folks fully understand before participating in.
And along that, do a lot of people even know that that's an option? I mean, before I got into problem gambling, like most people do, it's kind of just like, poof, now in my field of expertise. Um, do a lot of people even know that is an option, that it exists?
It's not a widely promoted one, and it's one resource in the toolbox that can be used, but again, not necessarily the one that we prefer to be the go-to source. So really, that's something where if someone's struggling, talk to their counselor. All of the counselors should be aware of what the program is and how it works. Not necessarily will the average person be, but there is signage and there's information at all 11 properties about the voluntary exclusion program. And if they have questions while they're on property, then there's either a lottery gaming agent or a casino control commission agent there 24/7 that can help provide support. And if they're interested in, then help them through the VEP process.
Okay, and we'll provide some of those resources in the comments for this video. So any other ones that you want to send to me, I'll go ahead and post those up after this. So it is Problem Gambling Awareness Month. We wanted to squeeze in this interview before the month of March was over. So what are some common misconceptions about problem gambling, or what are some things that you wish more people knew about it?
Well, when I talk to communities about gambling, so often I hear, well, if somebody has a gambling problem, they just need to quit. Stop gambling. If only it were that simple. So
Right.
that's really the biggest myth that I'd like to get people to recognize, that this is a disease and an addiction like other diseases. So it really should be viewed as the same, and understand that treatment resources are available for free throughout Ohio, and that help is available and hope is available. So if people are struggling, know that you are not alone, that there are resources available to help you.
Fantastic.
So that's probably the biggest myth.
That's the biggest thing. Okay, yeah. Perfect.
But others could just be, well, I'm winning, so I can't have a problem, or just not understanding what the odds actually are. And we as humans really like to think that we're luckier than we are. And when you're looking at gambling, the beautiful buildings aren't built on winners; they're built on people that didn't win. So always keep that in mind. That if you're going to have fun, sure, that's great. But if you're going because you want to win it big, that's not likely to happen. So if that's your sole method, then there's a wide variety of ways that you can invest your dollars in something that's likely to pay off a lot more.
Awesome. And what are some of those problem gambling prevention programs available for youth and adults? What are some of those?
So there are some programs that have been developed in Ohio, as well as a national program. So we have Stacked Deck, which is I think it's high school-based program for gambling. We have Smart Bet and Risky Business for various populations. Again, this is kind of in-person curriculum type things, but also just knowing what the risks of gambling are. And if you're choosing to gamble, have a good sense of what some of those low risk things to do would be. So if you're going to gamble, again, focus on the entertainment. Don't make it about trying to win big, and go to have a good time. Stick to an amount, a limit, whether that would be the amount of money that you spend, the amount of time that you're there, and always, always, always remember to never gamble with money that you don't have. So which means I can't gamble if I borrow from a friend, but also I shouldn't gamble if I have to put it on a credit card, because a credit card is money that you really don't have. So stick with the cash in your pocket, and those are all pieces that will keep you in that more low risk range.
The house always wins, right?
That's what they say.
That's what they say. I'll assume it's true. All right. Okay, so what are your hopes for the future of problem gambling prevention in Ohio or even nationally?
Yeah, well, we are really in an awesome spot in Ohio as we look at where we're seated and the collaboration and networks that we have. Uh, Often we're referred to nationally as the Ohio model, as this is what you should do in your states. And PGNO is the Ohio affiliate to the National Council on Problem Gambling. So there are 35 affiliates throughout the state, and we get to serve as the one for Ohio. And what that does is allow us to connect with and engage with others that either are like us or very different than us, but are all working on that same goal of getting resources to those that are impacted. And just the way we are with our funding system in Ohio really gives me a lot of hope with as gambling continues to expand, and we expect that it will with sports betting, with more focus on that whole gaming to gambling piece, that there's going to be additional resources available from the treatment side, but also importantly from the prevention side to really raise awareness and get the right resources to the right people at the right time.
Well, we
So,
and all the other prevention agencies are so excited to see what else is to come because you guys have been doing a phenomenal job.
well,
So,
thank you. I
for
think it's
sure, for sure.
interesting to look at an organization that of our two staff, we're both prevention people and have been in prevention for a long time. And as I look at my counterparts throughout other parts of the country, it's typically a treatment provider that then finds their way into the role of the affiliate and doesn't necessarily have that prevention background. And it's really good, I think, to see how we can all work together and understand that the skill set of a clinician is not necessarily the same skill set of a preventionist, and really focusing on, okay, what are you good at? What am I good at? And how can we make sure our skills mesh?
You can both bring your strength to the table and work from there, right?
That's the plan.
Awesome. Well, like I said, any resources that you have, we'll put the problem gambling helpline in the comments and at the end of this video. But before we say goodbye, I have a fast five for you. So we have
Okay.
five fun questions to round it out. You ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay. So what's one fun fact about you?
One fun fact about me. Well, I have a daughter who's 19 months and the funnest person ever.
Aw, I see all of her pictures all the time. She's so cute. Aw, I thought you were about to say a daughter who was 19. I was like,
That
I don't remember seeing
would
that.
be a surprising fact.
That would be a very surprising fact. Um, when are you the happiest?
I am the happiest. Well, I think there's two places, so I have to give two answers to that. Professionally, I'm the happiest when we can see the good work that's being done and really see the impact that we have. Personally, I'm the happiest when I'm just with my family and engaging with my daughter, and we're just kind of us. So while there's certainly challenges related to COVID-19 and not being able to go out of the house, there's also the benefit that we get to be together all the time, and this is cherished time that we don't normally get to have.
Oh, I love that. And going outside and going on walks. Exciting.
Everything's new
Uh,
too.
yes. If you could have dinner with anyone in the world, living or deceased, who would it be?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. I don't know.
No, it's pretty
uh,
deep.
so I'm gonna say if I could have dinner with anybody living or deceased, then I would love to have dinner with my grandfather who's passed away a while ago. Uh, it just share with him where my life has been since we were last able to connect, and get any insight that he might have now that I'm in this phase of my life, which is much different than when I last met him or last saw him.
I think he'd love that too. Your favorite quote or song?
Favorite quote or song? Well, let's say I don't know about a quote, so I'll paraphrase a quote, but something to the effect of "There's a reason for everything."
Mhm.
So we may not necessarily know what that reason is today, but down the road we'll look back and say, "Ah, now I see."
That's
And
why I have
there's
it.
a reason why we're in our chairs that we are right now, in the role that we do, and it's always my focus to maximize the time and talent that I have in whatever way possible, and ask that others do the same because we're all working with limited resources, and it's really up to us to make the most of the time and the talents that we have.
What a great message for the time that we're facing right now. So
Yeah, I hope.
I hope so. If you could move anywhere in the world right now, where would you go?
Columbus is the best place in the world. So,
Oh, I already
so
saw that coming, so I shouldn't be too surprised.
well, having only ever lived in Ohio, my experience is somewhat limited, but with where I am now, just on the north side of Columbus, can really have access to the things that I need and can also go out and just be with my family if I need to as well. So it's kind of that perfect balance. And as we're looking at the resources that are available through our state with the work that we do, there's no state better. And no place better. So I'm very happy where we are.
True Ohioan would only answer that way. I'm very
Ohio
impressed.
is the heart of it all.
I don't know if your wife would say the same, would she?
She's from Central Illinois, so likely not.
Oh, okay. She might choose somewhere more tropical and warm. Okay. Well, Derek, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm glad to see that you're still in high spirits during this crazy time. And as always, I love learning from you and listening to you. And hopefully, we can do this again sometime.
Great, absolutely. Well, I'd love to help out anytime and just let me know what your additional needs are and what other folks need. We do have our website, pgnohio.org, where folks can go on to, and we have resources for professionals as well. So it really hits on some of those pieces that we talked about through those evidence-based campaigns or those evidence-based programs. So resources are available, and I'm here to help.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Derek. You take care. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, you too. Bye bye.